Hi, welcome back to my channel Azure Learn. It's me Nagendra Kumar Singoti and today's topic would be SQL Server migration to Azure SQL DB. And even before we go ahead and talk about today's agenda, I would like to thank all the subscribers whoever have encouraged me so far in this journey. And moving ahead, today's agenda we are going to talk about migration overview and we are going to talk about migration considerations. We are going to talk about different migration tools and services that we are going to use, and post that we will jump into a demo, and in the demo we are going to do the assessment and then the migration. Okay, done. Let's get into the topic now. First question is like, where and all I can migrate from? This is the kind of question that you would be getting into. Is it only from on-premise or is it from somewhere or where? Where and all I can get migration done from? So SQL Server, if you have on-premise, yes, you can get it migrated to Azure. Or SQL Server, if you have already on a Azure virtual machine, then also you can do the migration. And if you have EC2 instance in AWS and you have your server, SQL Server hosted there, from there also you can get the migration done. And if you have RDS services that you have taken up from AWS, then also. And if you have anything on GCP, that is Google Cloud Platform, from there also you can plan the migration. These are all the locations from where you can migrate from. Coming to the overview, I would like to give you the Azure SQL Database, that means the Azure SQL DB, is a recommended target, usually for a SQL Server workload, which requires a fully managed platform as a service scenario. Then the Azure SQL DB would be a right option, because SQL DB handles most of DB management functions and you would get built-in high availability. You need not take care of it. And intelligent query processing, the scalability, and even the performance tuning and threat protection capabilities are also there. Simply you may have to choose options to configure it. And you have the flexibility to get this deployment done in a multiple ways with multiple deployment models so that it can suit your applications and different kind of workloads that you are working with. So all of this keeping in mind, the Azure SQL DB would be the most suitable one. However, there are still some scenarios in which SQL DB might not be a right option and there are other options we may have to look into. What are those? Let's have a look. Even before looking into the deployment options that are available in Azure, what are all the things that you have to be taking into consideration before you decide which deployment model to choose, or number of servers and the number of databases that you are planning to migrate. This is one factor that you may have to keep a stack of. The size of the databases. After having the number of databases into account and a picture, you may have to plan for the size. You may have to look or consider for the size of the database also. What's the size of the database that you're planning to migrate? And what are all the tolerable business downtimes that you can afford to during migration, maybe pre-migration, maybe post-migration? So there are three different stages in any migration: pre, during, and post. So what is the downtime that is acceptable for your business? And once you consider all of these, then you might be thinking about the appropriate target on the deployment model, whether to choose the Azure SQL DB. When you talk about Azure SQL DB, you have two different options. There is a single database option available. There is an elastic pool option available. And even the purchasing models also you might be considering whether you would like to go for a vCore model or a DTU model or a serverless model. And couple of service tiers, like whether the service tier you are going to choose a general purpose or a standard service tier or a business critical one. So these would impact on the performance, and not just on the performance, even on the costing also. Okay. So to get clear picture, I have put up this slide. You can have a look here. One is that if you would like to move your SQL Server from on-premise to Azure as is, then the IaaS model, that means infrastructure as a service model. That means you are going to spin up a VM, choose the OS that you want, and install the SQL Server on it, and then get the migration done. That means the target database is ready, and from source you are going to get it migrated. Here you have spinned up your infra. That is, the SQL Server is on a virtual machine. This is one of the options. And the other option is on the managed instance. So you want to lift and shift, but you do not want to manage or take the strains of the underlying infra, underlying OS, its patching, even the SQL Server version, its patching, its update, its protection. All of these, if you would like to delegate it to Microsoft itself, then the SQL Server managed instance. This managed instance is a fully managed PaaS service that is being offered to you. The other option, in a cost-effective or an inexpensive mode, if you would like to go with, then the Azure SQL DB. That also falls under the category of platform as a service. And this one is made available in two different options, single DB and an elastic pool. So now you might be thinking, okay, what are all the use cases under which I might be going for SQL Server virtual machine or a managed instance or SQL DB, right? Just have a look. I'll explain you the use cases. Managed instances are available in two different options. Recently, they have added the instance pool. Earlier, the single instance used to be there. Managed instance, which is going to be helpful for you in a lift and shift scenario, but when you do not want to manage the underlying infra, underlying OS, underlying software, its updates, patching, security, the backup, high availability, all of this, then this PaaS model would be helpful for you. So that means under PaaS, you have two different options, SQL MI, SQL DB. In SQL MI, two different options again, single instance and instance pool. And in SQL DB, again two options, single database and then elastic pool. Some of the use cases that I have put. If you would like to have complete control on the OS and on the SQL Server, then you might be going for SQL Server on a VM. But if you would like to have a fully managed SQL Server, you would be going for SQL managed instance. If you would like to have a fully managed database, but it's a single DB that you are working with, then obviously you would be going for Azure SQL DB. To start with, at a minimal pace, this would be fine in a cost-effective mode. And in case, let's say you are into a service offering and then you have various clients that you are taking care of, and you have a service that is hosted in Azure, and now for DB you require again a kind of multi-tenancy approach also, then the Azure SQL DB, wherein elastic pools would come handy for you for a multi-tenancy scenario. Okay, so assuming that you have got the picture of the different use cases on how do you choose the appropriate deployment option or choose an appropriate target. Let's say you have to stay back on particular version of SQL Server. You do not want always up to date one. Then maybe the SQL Server on a VM should be fine for you. Or there are some strict dependencies on some of the features which are not supported in a managed instance or a SQL DB, like the file streams, file tables, or maybe polybase or cross-instance transactions. These kind of things are there which are binding you to stay on the SQL Server itself, not the PaaS offering. Then obviously you would be choosing SQL Server on a virtual machine. Okay, so moving ahead, what are all the different tools that we are going to use in today's demo? Azure Migrate is one of the tools that all of you would be knowing that it's a hub for your migration. It's going to help you for all your servers migration, DB migrations, or maybe the VDI migrations. Entire your migration journey to Azure happens from this. It's a hub, Azure Migrate. I'm not going to show you in today's demo the Azure Migrate, but just thought of listing you for your information on the different migration tools that are being offered by Microsoft. We are going to use specially today the DMA, that is, it stands for Data Migration Assistant. This is a client-side installable application which would help you to get your migration done. And here, say the discovery and assessment would be done by this. Any fixes are required to make it suitable for migration. Those fixes also would be recommended and you can act appropriately. And DMS, the Azure Database Migration Service. The DMS is available in two modes, the offline, the online. The offline is free of cost, the online is a paid one, and the advantage is very much understandable by name itself. One helps you to have the offline migration wherein there would be a downtime which required some level of planning and then effective mitigation. And online migration option, there would be a piece of downtime, but it's going to be very, very minimal. Okay, so to summarize, wherever your SQL Server, all that locations, it could be AWS, it could be GCP, it could be on Azure itself, or it could be on on-premise, you can bring it up, you can migrate it to Azure. And even if you have MySQL Server or PostgreSQL Server or MongoDB, those also can be brought onto Azure. We have Azure DB for MySQL, Azure DB for PostgreSQL, MongoDB can be migrated to Cosmos DB. And the different tools that we use, DMA, which is Data Migration Assistant, and then the DMS, which is Azure Database Migration Server. Coming to the migration process overview, as I told you, offline migration and then online migration. However, the total number of steps first is to assess the database and prepare for any of the fixes that is required to make it compatible to get onto Azure, and then deploy those fixes and then migrate the database. So this is how the approach goes, and we would use the DMA and then check it how do we fix that also, even before migrating. The offline migration, if you see here in the pre-migrate, the app is connected to the database and all is fine. And then offline migration is making it to get disconnected from the app. The DB got disconnected, DB is stopped and disconnected from the app, and then migration service is into action, and then it is being pushed to the target database. And once it is ready at the target database, then the connection strings and other things would get changed and put it to the target, not to the source. This is offline migration. So here there is a downtime. And in online migration, if you see at the extreme left, the app and the DB, all is fine. The migration time also, when migration service is intact, app is still connected to the DB and transactions are happening. And after the target is ready, now here there is one stage that you make a sync by disconnecting the app from the source to the target and put it to the target and make a sync. And once the last bit of the transactions, whatever left out and all have come up and then all in sync, then you would disconnect the source, and that over time you would decide and then push the connection strings and everything to the target itself, and people would start communicating to the target database. So let's get into demo now. So I am taking you to Azure portal, and in Azure portal what I have, I am showing it to you here. You see I have one VM, and this VM obviously has got a storage account associated with, and there is an NIC card associated with, and there is an IP associated with, and there is a virtual network. Here, what is that I am trying to do is to get connected. I am not using RDP. I am using Azure Bastion, and this Azure Bastion is helping me to get connected through an HTML5 web client. And apart from this, where the SQL Server is currently, I have even got a SQL DB spinned up. This is the target, and this is where the source is. So the SQL Server which is there on this VM, we are going to migrate it to this Azure SQL DB. Okay, I have logged into my VM, and in VM I'll show you that I require the DMA, the Data Migration Assistant, to be installed. As I mentioned you earlier, this is an installable client-side application that needs to be downloaded and installed, and then you would use it for assessment. I have already downloaded and kept it. Let's try to install this. And you have to remember, even before installing this, the prerequisite for this is the .NET Framework 4.8, and I have downloaded and got the .NET Framework installed already into this. So let's try to install the Data Migration Assistant. Let's follow the wizard, accept the license agreement, install. It should not take much time, and we should be ready. Okay, so it's already ready, and then I'll say launch the Data Migration Assistant, and it's launching the application. I would create new project for assessment, and this one I'm choosing, by default it's assessment, I'm choosing it now, and project name. So what the database that I have right now is a social database, and it's a database that is actually the Twitter details capture being the social DB, okay, social media DB. So that one I'm trying to migrate it. It's a sample fictitious DB. Social DB assessment is the name that I give for this project, and source server is SQL Server. The target is Azure SQL DB. Target can be, as we discussed, it could be SQL DB managed instance, it could be SQL Server on a virtual machine, or any of this, but now here it is Azure SQL DB, and then create it. Check these options if they are not checked already. What is that we are going to do? We are going to check database compatibility. We are going to check database feature parity information. Say next. Okay, this is my server name, and authentication type Windows authentication. Also check this, trust server test certificate. Say connect. Okay, so we'll have to add sources. Here it is about this particular source with this DB. And if you have any of the extended events or traces to be assessed, you can enter the path of that also here. I'm clicking add, and the social DB from the SQL Server 2016, which is there on this VM, and it has got the 16 MB size, and the compatibility information it is showing 130. And there are different compatibility levels available for different versions. You can check it up in the net, Google it for. I am just starting the assessment. Assessment is in progress. It shouldn't take much time as it's a small database. And you see here, SQL Server feature parity, Azure SQL Database does not support trace flags. There are two impacted objects on this, and then service broker feature is not supported in Azure SQL DB. So this is another message that it has given. So here on this feature parity, these are the two issues that it is highlighting, and on compatibility issues, Again, it's same. The service broker feature is not supported in Azure SQL DB. And what is the recommendation? It's saying service broker feature is not supported in Azure SQL DB, considering migrating it to Azure SQL managed instance that supports this particular feature. So it has even given you the recommendation also on what to do next in case if you have some issues. Since service broker is not being used in this particular DB, I'm least bothered. I'll just try to change the setting and then move ahead for this demo. And on the trace flags, it is saying trace flags are used to temporarily set specific server characteristics or to switch off a particular behavior. Trace flags are frequently used to diagnose performance issues or do something like this. And the recommendation is review impacted object section to see trace flags that are not supported in SQL DB. Evaluate if they can be removed. So that is what it is saying. It's okay. Alternatively, it is saying you can even migrate to Azure SQL managed instance also. Okay. So in my scenario now, what do I do is I'll just log in into the SQL Server through SSMS. SSMS is a SQL Server Management Studio, in case if you have not seen or do not know. This is a client application for you to get connected to your SQL Server, the DB engine, and then do the DB development. All the DB developers, most of the DB developers might be using this, or maybe some other client tools also. And even Visual Studio also can be used as a client tool to do your DB development. But I haven't seen anyone using Visual Studio for DB development. It's a rare scenario. The flexibility and the easiness and the look and feel and the familiarity mostly goes with SSMS. So let me get connected to this SQL Server through this SSMS. So this is the database that we are working now, this social DB. So what is that I'm going to do is I'll try to alter the database to disable the brokered service. Execute it. Okay. So query executed successfully. And now we will do the reassessment. Let's try to close this because even before doing the migration, we may have to close that. I can do the restart assessment here itself. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to rerun the assessment, social DB assessment 1 and DB engine, SQL Server, SQL Database, create, and then say next. Server authentication, say connect, then choose the server, the DB, say add, then start the assessment. Okay, so if you see here, the compatibility issues, it's taken off because the service broker option that we have disabled from the SQL Server. So this is no more. And here the trace flags is still there, which I'm going to ignore and then go ahead with the migration. Now for migration, especially with Azure SQL DB, I have both the options. Either I can choose to go with the DMA itself, because DMA is more than enough for me to do the migration also, especially for single SQL DB, or I can choose the DMS, which is again I have to go to Azure portal and create that service, create a project, and then do the migration. So here, one more thing I would like to show you, upload to Azure Migrate. In case if you are doing through Azure Migrate all the servers, DBs, VDIs, the entire thing, this information also you can upload there, and then you can have a central repository of all your migration practices being monitored and managed from there. Okay, so that option is also there. I'll just now go to Azure Database Migration Services. Okay, and here create Azure Database Migration Service. Choose that you would like to migrate from SQL Server to Azure SQL DB, and then select, and here I would like to select the existing resource group. Service name Social DB migration, and I would like to choose the same region here, Southeast Asia. Then the service mode Azure. Standard one core, I would go with the default settings and then click on review and create. For networking, okay, so I would go with the default networking. Okay, so this service is getting created. Deployment is in progress. Once it gets deployed, we will proceed with further steps. Okay, so the deployment has been done and we can create a new migration project. So here, Social DB migration project. I'll give the name. Source type is SQL Server, target is SQL DB. Migration activity type, you have the option either to get only schema migrated or even DB migrated. So for now, I'm doing the schema only migration. Create and run activity. SQL Server name, authentication type, username, password, select the target next. It's validating the source details. Okay, select target now. SQL Server, go to target SQL Server, copy the name, come back and provide SQL authentication and password and select the database and then the schema. So here the source database and then the target database and schema source, generate from the source itself. If you have multiple databases, if you can select which one you want, which one you do not want. And now the summary is the source server name, the source server version, target server name, target server version, databases to migrate, and type of activity currently is schema migration only, and then start the migration. Giving the name Social DB schema migration, the name that I'm giving, and then I'll say start migration. Okay, so it's running. We could have even done the schema migration from Azure Data Migration Assistant, and from there even not just the schema, DB also could have been done because it supports well with the Azure SQL DB, but I thought of showing you the DMS also. So initially we are migrating the schema. It's generating the script. Okay, so it shows that it's completed. Okay, we can see here in the, I'm going to add my client IP. Save this so that I can access it from the current system. Okay, it's been done. Then let me go to databases, database, and then query editor preview and login by supplying the credential details. Okay, I can see here, yes, the schema is there. Okay, I guess schema only, we do not have any data into it, so there is no data. So now what I'm going to do is from the same migration, I'll create a project, Social DB migration, SQL Server, all these data details remain same. Here I am selecting the data migration, and rest of the details I'll have to supply the same the way that I have supplied some time back. give the credentials. Choose this, select databases. Okay, I have social DB. Next, target name, come here, select the complete name, come back, username, password, map to the target databases. Remember, we have already created the schema of the source database. Okay. Final DB migration activity I'm saying, and all the details you verify one more time, and then do start migration. Once the DB gets migrated, we have both schema and then DB migrated to the target database. This is how the migration is done using DMA plus DMS, and DMA helps you for the assessment and any of the prefixes that you have to get that to make it compatible to get migrated, or have any other alternative recommendation for a best practice of migration. And DMS is going to help you to do the actual migration for schema and then the data both. Okay, it shows that it's done, it's completed. Let's check. Okay, so now let's get on to the SQL DB. It's available, it's online. Let's check if the data has come. Yep, that's it. So we have got all the rows from this sample database which has come here. So this is it for today, and give it a big thumbs up if you have liked this video and found it helpful, and then don't forget to subscribe to the channel to stay tuned for all the upcoming videos. Okay, thank you, have a good day, bye bye.